Hello everyone, I am Brian Braun-Duin along with...
Chris Van Meter. How are you?
Excellent. I am doing excellent today. Today we have a Naya Midrange deck.
Yes.
Or as I like to say, Minotaurs and Elementals. I mean, Wizards and Elementals.
Wizards
Sorry.
and Elementals.
Wizards and Elementals. This is a deck that finished in the top 8 of the Open last weekend. I've been trying to make a Naya deck work. Wasn't really working out for me. I like a lot of the aspects of this deck, so I think this is a very good starting point for Naya.
Definitely.
So yeah, I want to jump in and talk about the deck, talk about like some of the sweet synergies in here.
Boy, are they sweet.
Yeah, my personal favorite synergy is Forest, Elvish Mystic, and Boros Reckoner.
Wait, what?
You can use the Forest to cast the Elvish Mystic, and then you can wait 3 more turns and then cast your Boros Reckoner.
I guess that works.
Yeah, so...
I never really thought that I would miss Abington's Pilgrim as much as I do now.
Yep.
But a little traveling guy is missed. Sorely missed.
Yeah, very, very much missed. Yeah, so that is one awkward thing about the deck is just like the Forest Mystic Boros Reckoner draw. But beyond that, like you still have Sylvan Caryatid to like fix your mana, to make Boros Reckoner a little bit easier to cast, and you do have all your lands except for the Forest do cast him. So even though he probably won't come down until like turn 4 most of the time, he's still powerful enough at that mana cost. So basically, what this deck has is basically just the most efficient creatures at their mana cost. You have like a couple of the mana guys. You have Ooze at 3. Or at 2, you have Smiter and Reckoner at 3, which are probably the most powerful 2 creatures at that mana cost for these colors.
Definitely.
Polykranos, there's a lot of like strong creatures at that mana cost. Could be Goreclan Rampager, could be Crush the Police, could be a number of other cards like that. But I like Polykranos a lot, especially when you have like a bunch of mana guys like this. The fight ability becomes much more relevant when you have like a lot of mana. And then Stormbreath Dragon is, basically mini Thundermaw, probably going to be a staple for the next year or 2 in Standard. So,
get used to it.
Yep. Get used to taking some damage when he goes monstrous. But yeah, basically just the most efficient creatures we have at the mana cost, and then to complement that, we have Celestia Charm, which I think is really good in the format right now. There's a lot of creatures like this guy who are pretty big and would love getting exiled. There's a lot of Obsidats running around.
Yeah.
So Celestia Charm gets its mileage in exiling some big creatures, but it also is very good at kind of serving as a mini Goreclan Rampager when you need that effect. This is basically like the Goreclan Rampager of this deck.
Yeah, it plays like a Goreclan Rampager, but it doesn't have the vulnerabilities of playing actual Goreclan Rampager.
Right.
So that can't be taken out of your hand by a Lifebane zombie, and if you're on the Celestia Charm side of the Goreclan Rampager battle, you just get to exile whatever creature they pump and just 2-for-1 them very easily. So like I definitely like Charm a lot better than Rampager right now.
Yep, I like that too. We have 4 Domri Raid. I think that's pretty self-explanatory. I think you probably agree that Domri is just the best reason to play a deck like this.
Yeah, Domri is just, it's the only reason to play a deck like this. Like if Domri hadn't been printed, these types of decks wouldn't even exist. Domri is just that powerful. Gone and checked it, wins the game, draws cards. And it also plays very well with the Celestia Charm. So before, like with Goreclan Rampager, you have to post-combat fight with Domri if you pump your guy, but now you can pre-combat pump a guy, kill the blocker, and then get in for damage.
Yeah, and Domri also combos very well with Boros Reckoner to go along with our Forest and Elvish Mystics.
Not looking forward to that one.
When you fight a Boros Reckoner on their guy, you're basically killing 2 creatures, assuming their creatures are like 2 toughness or less. Like You get to kill a creature with the fight ability, and then the damage that creature deals to Reckoner, you get to shoot at yet another creature. So
or just back at the opponent and then attack.
So generally speaking, Domri plus Reckoner is going to kill 2 creatures, or even better, it's usually like a 3-for-1 basically. Yeah. Domri is also very good with like Polykranos, which is just a massive guy. Then we also have 2 Chandra Pyromaster, and this card is like spiked significantly in play recently, and has just kind of showing itself to be one of the most powerful cards in Standard.
I agree, and I've been touting how good Chandra is since the last Standard format, and I'm really happy that as the format changes, she becomes even more cohesive with the format. She's not very good against all the mono red decks that have been doing very well, but even then, if you stabilize, you can kill all the X1s that they're drawing off the top of their deck, so it's never really that bad.
Yeah, I agree with that. Like, this is not a card I'm excited to play against a mono red deck, but against Any kind of mid-range battle against decks like this, it's very powerful, and it's very powerful against like the control decks as well, just by providing a constant source of card advantage. Like they have to deal with Chandra, or you're just going to between like Domri and Chandra, you can just start drawing dragons every turn, or you basically drawing 2-3 cards a turn. It's just too much for them to overcome.
Yeah, if your opponent has Azorius Charm, Domri and Chandra are gonna put a number on them.
Yeah, they're gonna wreck that. And then last we have 2 Mizium Mortars, which again we have a lot of mana here, and I think Mizium Mortars is like one of the better spells in the new format. Just kills a lot of creatures, and the overload is like pretty important in like big creature battles like this.
Yeah, so. Like when you're in the mirror, it is one of the few cards that can actually kill a Stormbreath Dragon. And if you get to overload it before they start playing a whole bunch of creatures, you can actually kill like their Sylvan Caryatids among with the rest of their creatures, which gives you a huge mana advantage, which is probably just going to win you the game.
Yeah, that was actually the next point I was going to make, because I think Sylvan is going to become a pretty big part of the standard format, and the ability for Mizium Mortars to actually be a removal spell for it when you overload it is actually pretty key.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's the main deck here. It's a pretty straightforward Naya deck, but it's still very powerful. I guess the last thing I want to mention is the mana base. I'm actually not a huge fan of the mana base. I don't feel like I'm gonna have issues hitting the colors. We do have 20 duels, which is a lot. The only thing I'm worried about is we have 8 lands that have to come into play tapped, which is going to slow us down a lot. And then we have 12 shock lands, which are probably going to have to come into play untapped because we have the 8 lands that have to come into play tapped. Mm-hmm. So for that reason, I expect that we're going to be dealing a lot of damage to ourselves, which is kind of a problem in matchups like Mono Red. So
yep, when there's no Thragtusk around, your opponent's starting at 16. I like those odds.
Yeah, so that is one thing I probably would want to try to find room for a couple more basics, like maybe a mountain and a plains, or a couple mountains, just to still be able to cast cards like Stormbreath Dragon and Boros Reckoner, but at the same time, I don't want to always be like playing a tapped land or shocking myself to be able to do so. But yeah, this is the main deck for Naya, and I'm going to jump into the sideboard now.
Let's do it.
All right, so we have the sideboard here. Gore-Clan Rampager is just another card to come in matchups where you really want that effect. Like matchups where Domri is dominant, a lot of these mid-rangey battles, like that's where access to another Gore-Clan Rampager is really good. Like you're not going to want Gore-Clan against a deck that's going to have a lot of Azorius Charms or Doomblades or anything like that. But any deck that's like on the Mizium Mortars type plan, you're going to want Rampagers to make your Domries better and to like push through damage over top of like their Boros Reckoners and things like that.
Definitely. I think that if we still had it, this would be as Zealous Conscripts instead for that same role. And while we still have Active Treason, that just makes your Domries worse. So using Gore-Clan as like a pseudo-conscripts where you can push damage through a blocker is the next best thing. Yeah,
like this could also be like a 4th Selesnya Charm, but I think it's diversifying is fine. We also have 3 Voice, and I actually think Voice, I don't know where you would find room, but I think Voice is good enough to be a main deck. I think Voice is one of the better cards in the new standards, one that hasn't gotten a lot of press, like not many people are talking about it, but I still think this is one of the most powerful cards. And I'm glad to see that it's in the 75 at all, but yeah, I definitely think this card is powerful enough to be main deck. It just is such a beating against any of the aggressive decks and is still good against control.
Yeah, and it's not even terrible in the mid-range decks where you guys are having board stalls, and at some point you can just turn it into a 6/6.
Yep, you just block their big guy, soak up a bunch of damage. Now you have a huge attacker that they have to deal with. Yep. We have Rurik Thar. Rurik Thar is one of my most I would list this as one of the most underrated cards going into the new standard.
I agree.
We played it in a video a couple weeks ago and saw how powerful it was there, and I definitely think that this is also a main deckable card. I think this card's powerful enough, and I definitely expect to see a lot of Rurik Thar like moving forward. In this deck, it's not as good. It's much better when you have Gore-Clans in your deck, but I still think that this is like an extremely powerful card against any mid-range or control deck.
Even if you don't have the Gore-Clans, I still think he's very, very good. Like he's a 6/6 for 6, which is a great rate, and he also has reach. So like if you're playing against other Stormbreath Dragon decks, like this guy is going to come down around the same time when you have Accelerants. He's going to continue to attack and put them in the abyss, and then they can just never attack you back with their dragons. Yeah. Like I feel like he's just very good, especially against the other Stormbreath decks.
Yeah, I agree with that a lot. Unflinching Courage too, I think, is awesome in this deck because I'm not the hugest fan of Unflinching Courage in general, But here we have Smiter and Boros Reckoner, which are both like two pretty good targets to put it on.
Yeah.
And there's also like Polykranos. There's just a lot of like very fat creatures in the deck. So I think it makes Unflinching Courage a lot better when you have that kind of fat. Like there are a lot of decks that used to play it where like Smiter was really like the only good target to put it on. And I was never a fan of it in those decks, but I definitely like it here.
Yeah, Courage is good.
Yep. You may be on the poor end of Unflinching Courage at some point in these videos. So
I'm ready for it.
I'm hoping that's the case. Flames of the Firebrand is an interesting choice. I think this is a choice that depends on how the metagame shapes up, really, because like it could be very good. It could also just not be that good. For example, I think Flames is a card that I would have expected to be like really good against mono red because all the block constructed mono red decks had like tons of X1s. But like the mono red deck that you're playing today only has one X1 in the deck, so Flames is like still a good card, but just much worse against you. And I think a lot of like it just depends on how decks like mono red are built to whether or not this is a good card. And without like Avacyn's Pilgrims and Arbor Elves and stuff like that in the format, like it's not going to get as much value against those decks either.
I agree. Like it's primarily going to be for the mono red decks, and even though the list that I'm playing, the one that won, doesn't have a lot of X1s in it, like Owen's deck that was in the top 8 has just like a billion X1s in it, and the ones that got 10th and 11th also just have like a billion X1s, including Young Pyromancer. So I mean, the majority of the mono red decks that were in the top 16 are very vulnerable to Flames of the Firebrand, and they all had Flames in their sideboard, which is why I think that Philip ended up doing so well with his deck, because he wasn't vulnerable to the powerful card.
Yeah, that's a very good point. And then the last card we have is Destructive Revelry, and I probably wouldn't play 3 of these, but I do think it has like some place. Detention Sphere is kind of one of the most popular cards in Standard right now, and I think having a way to deal with that is pretty good. Also, Ratchet Bomb is usually pretty good against decks like this. So, like a Ratchet Bomb on 3 takes out almost all of our very good cards. So, being able to just like hit it before they can do that, like they can sacrifice it in response and not take damage, but they're not killing all your guys in the process either.
It's correct. Plus, like the Azorius Charm decks can't beat Domri and or Chandra. Their only real answers to it are Detention Sphere, and this handles it. So
yep, exactly. So
get to punish them.
Yeah, I like having a couple Destructive Revelries, and also it is also an answer to cards like Unflinching Courage in the Mirror Match. So
that's true.
But yeah, this is a sideboard. I think this Naya deck was pretty well built. I definitely would change a couple things, but that's a lot of that's probably just even in hindsight of like what we've seen so far. So I think like this is a pretty well built deck and definitely deserved a top 8. And I'm pretty excited to play with it.